Hi, scholars. This is our Matilda read aloud, and this is our last read aloud. We are about to finish the book today. It's been a great book, probably one of my favorites. I hope you've been enjoying it. And it's kind of sad that we're ending this book, but it just gives us the chance to read another one later on. So we will be reading the last chapters. So let's get started. The third miracle. The next day was Thursday, and that, as the whole of Miss Honey's class knew, was the day on which the headmistress would take charge of the first lesson after lunch. In the morning, Miss Honey said to them, "One or two of you did not particularly enjoy the last occasion when the headmistress took the class, so let us try to be especially careful and clever today. How are your ears, Eric, after that at last encounter with Miss Trunchbull?" "She stretched them," Eric said. "My mother said, and a positive they were bigger than they were." "And Rupert?" Miss Honey said. "I'm glad to see you didn't lose any of your hair after last Thursday." "My head was jolly sore afterwards," Rupert said. "And you, Nigel?" Miss Honey said. "Did you try not to be a smart aleck with Miss Hedges today? You really were quite cheeky to her last week." "I hate her," Nigel said. "Try not to make it too obvious," Miss Honey said. "It doesn't pay. She's a very strong woman. She has the muscles like steel ropes." "I wish I was grown up," Nigel said. "I'd knock her flat." "I doubt you would," Miss Honey said. "No one has ever got the better of her yet." "What will she be testing us on this afternoon?" a small girl asked. "Almost certainly there are 3 times tables," Miss Honey said. "That's what you are meant to have learned this past week. Make sure you know it." Lunch came and went. After lunch, the class resembled Miss Honey stood at one side of the room. They all sat silent, apprehensive, waiting. And then, like some giant doom, the enormous Trunchbull strode in the room in her green breeches and cotton smock. She went straight to the jug of water and lifted it by the handle and peered inside. "I'm glad to see," she says, "that there are no slimy creatures in my drinking water this time. If there had been, then something exponentially unpleasant would have happened to every single member of this class. And that includes you, Miss Honey." The class remained silent and very tense. They had learned a bit about the tigress by now, and nobody was about to take any chances. "Very well," boomed the Trunchbull. "Let us see how you know your 3 times tables. Or, to put it another way, let us see how badly Miss Honey has taught you the 3 times tables." The Trunchbull was standing in front of the class, legs apart, hands on her hips, scowling at Miss Honey, who stood silent to one side. Matilda, sitting motionless at her desk at the second row, was watching things very closely. "You," the Trunchbull shouted, pointing at the finger, size and rolling pin at a boy called Wilfred. Wilfred was on the extreme right of the row. "Stand up, you," she shouted at him. Wilfred stood up. "Recite the 3 times tables backwards," the Trunchbull barked. "Backwards?" stammered Wilfred. "But I haven't learned it backwards." "There you are," cried the Trunchbull, triumphant. "She's taught you nothing. Miss Honey, why have you taught them absolutely nothing in all the last week?" "That is not true, headmistress," Miss Honey said. "They have all learned their 3 times tables." "But I see no point in teaching them backwards." "There is little point to teaching them anything backwards. The whole object of life, headmistress, is to go forward. I venture to ask whether even you, for example, can spell a simple word like wrong backwards straight away. I very much doubt it." "Don't you imprint with me, Miss Honey," the Trunchbull snapped. Then she turned back the unfortunate Wilfred. "Very well, boy," she said. "Answer me this. I have 7 apples, 7 oranges, and 7 bananas. How many pieces of fruit do I have altogether? Hurry up, get on with it. Give me the answer." "That's adding up," Wilfred cried. This isn't the 3 times tables." but we know it is, right? Multiplication is really just adding faster. "You blithering idiot," shouted the Trunchbull. "You festering gumbole. You flea-bitten fungus. This is the 3 times tables. You have 3 separate lots of fruit, and each lot has 7 pieces. 3 sevens are 21. Can't you see that, you stagnant cesspool? I'll give you one more chance. I have 8 coconuts, 8 monkey nuts, and 8 nutty little idiots like you. How many nuts do I have altogether? Answer me quickly." Poor Wilfred was properly flustered. "Wait," he cried. "Please wait. I've got to add up the 8 coconuts, 8 monkey nuts." He started counting on his fingers. "You burstring blister," yelled the Trunchbull. "You moth-eating maggot. This is not adding up. This is multiplication. The answer is 3 eighths. Or is it 8 threes? What is the difference between 3 eighths and 8 threes? Tell me that, you mangled little Wurzel, and look sharp about it." By now, Wilfred was far too frightened and bewildered to even speak. In the 2 strides, the Trunchbull was beside him, and boy, some amazing gymnastics trick it may have to undo judo or karate. She flipped the back of Wilfred's legs and one in his feet so that the boy stood off the ground and turned a somersault in the air. But halfway through the somersault, she caught him by an ankle and held him dangling upside down like plucking chicken in the shop window. 8 threes, the Trunchbull shouted, swinging Wilfred from side to side by his ankle. 8 threes is the same as 3 eighths, and 3 eighths is 24. Repeat that. Oof. At exactly that moment, Nigel, at the other end of the room, jumped to his feet and started pointing excitedly at the backboard, screaming, "The chalk! The chalk! Look, the chalk! It's moving all on its own!" So hysterical and shrill that Nigel screamed that everyone in place, including the Trunchbull, looked at the blackboard, and there, sure enough, a brand new piece of chalk was hovering near the gray black writing surface of the blackboard. "It's writing something," screamed Nigel. "The chalk is writing something." And indeed it was. "What the blazes is this?" yelled the Trunchbull. It had shaken to her own first name, being written like that by an invincible hand. She dropped Wilfred on the floor. Then she yelled at nobody in particular. "Who's doing this? Who's writing it?" The chalk continued to write. "Agatha. This is Magnus. This is Magnus." Everyone in place heard the gasp that came from the Trunchbull's throat. "No," she cried. "It can't be. It can't be Magnus." "It is Magnus, and you better believe it." Miss Honey, at the side of the room, glanced swiftly at Matilda. The child was sitting very straight at her desk, the head held high and mouth compressed, the eyes glittering like 2 stars. "Agatha, give my Jenny back her house." For some reason, everyone now looked at the Trunchbull. The woman's face turned white as snow as her mouth was opening and shuddering like a halibut out of water, giving out a series of strangled gasps. "Give my Jenny her wages. Give my Jenny the house. Then get out of here. If you don't, I will come and get you. I will come and get you like you got me. I am watching you, Agatha." The chalk stopped writing. It hovered for a few moments, then suddenly dropped to the floor with a tinkle and broke in 2. Wilfred, who had managed to resume in his seat in the front row, screamed, "Miss Trunchbull has fallen down! Miss Trunchbull is on the floor!" This was the most sensational bit of news, and all the entire class jumped up out of their seats to have a really good look. And there she was, the huge figure of the headmistress, stretched full length on her back across the floor, out for the count. Miss Honey ran forward and knelt beside the prostrate giant. She's fainted, she cried. She's cold. Someone go fetch the matron at once. 3 children ran out of the room. Nigel was ready for action, leapt up and seized the big jug of water. My father says cold water is the best way to wake someone up who's fainted, he says, and with that he tipped the entire contents of the jug over the Trunchbull's head. No one, not even Miss Honey, protested. As for Matilda, she continued to sit motionless at her desk. She was feeling curiously elated. She felt as though she had touched something that was not quite of this world, the highest point of the heavens and the farthest star. She had felt most wonderfully power surging through her eyes, gushing like a warm fluid inside her skull, and her eyes become scorching hotter and hotter than ever before, and the things had come bursting out of her eye sockets, and then a piece of chalk has lifted itself up and began to write. It seemed as though she had hardly done anything, and it was all so simple. The school matron, followed by 5 teachers, 3 women, and 2 men, came rushing in the room. By golly, someone's floored her at last, cried one of the men, grinning. Congratulations, Miss Honey. Who threw the water over her? Asked the matron. I did, Nigel said proudly. Good for you, another teacher said. Shall we get some more? Stop that, the matron said. We must carry her up to the sick room. It took all 5 teachers and the matron to lift up the enormous woman and stagger her out of the room. Miss Honey said to the class, I think you'd all better go out to the playground and amuse yourselves until the next lesson. She then turned and walked over to the blackboard carefully and wiped the chalk writing. The children began filing out of the room. Matilda started to go with them, but she passed Miss Honey and paused over her twinkly eye, met the teacher, and Miss Honey ran forward and gave a tiny child a great big hug. Wow. Good for Matilda. She knew what she was doing. Let's finish off last chapter, A New Home. Before we start, A New Home, think about what this title is trying to tell us about this chapter. Who do you think's getting a new home? Let's keep that in mind. Later that day, the news began to spread that the headmistress had recovered from fainting fit and then had marched out of the school building tightly in a white in the face. The next morning, she did not turn up at school. At lunchtime, Mr. Tilbury, the deputy head, telephoned the house to inquire if she was feeling unwell. There was no answer to the phone. When school was over, Mr. Tilbury decided to investigate further, so he walked to the house where Miss Trunchbull lived at the edge of the village, the lovely small red brick Georgian building, known as the Red House, tucked away in the woods behind the hills. He rang the bell, no answer. He knocked loudly, no answer. He called out, Is somebody home? No answer. He tried the door, and to his surprise, found it unlocked. He went in. The house was silent, and there was no one in it. And yet the furniture was still in place. Mr. Tilbury went upstairs to the main bedroom. He also seemed everything to be normal until he started opening drawers and looking into cupboards. There was no clothes, no underclothes, or no shoes anywhere. They had all been gone. She'd done a bunk, Mr. Tilbury said to himself, and went to inform the school governors that the headmistress had apparently vanished. She left. On the second morning, Miss Honey received the registered post a letter from the firm of local solicitors informing her that the last will and testament of her late father, Dr. Honey, had suddenly and mysteriously turned up. The document revealed that ever since her father's death, Miss Honey had been, in fact, the rightful owner of the property on the edge of the village known as the Red House, and until recently had been occupied by Miss Agatha Trunchbull. The will also showed up by her father's lifetime savings, which fortunately were still safely in the bank, had also been left to her. The solicitor's letter added that if Miss Honey would kindly call in the office as soon as possible, the property and the money could be transferred into her name very rapidly. Miss Honey did just that, and within a couple of weeks, she had moved into the Red House, the very place in which she had brought up, and where luckily all the family furniture and pictures were still around. From then on, Matilda was a welcome visitor to the Red House every single evening after school. and a very close friendship began to develop between the teacher and the small child. So Miss Honey was actually the one who got the new house. Or a new home. Let's keep reading. Back at school, great changes were also taking place. As soon as it became clear that Miss Trunchbull had completely disappeared from the scene, the excellent Mr. Trilby was appointed the head teacher in her place. And very soon after that, Matilda was moved up to the top form with Miss Plinsmore. Quickly discovered that this amazing child was every bit as bright as Miss Honey had said. One evening, a few weeks later, Matilda was having tea with Miss Honey in the kitchen of the Red House after school, like they always did, when Matilda said suddenly, "Something strange has happened to me, Miss Honey." "Tell me about it," Miss Honey said. "This morning," Matilda said, "just for fun, I tried to push something over with my eyes, and I couldn't do it. Nothing moved. I didn't even feel the hotness building behind my eyeballs. The power had gone. I think I've lost it completely." Miss Honey carefully buttered a slice of brown bread and put a little strawberry jam on it. "I've been expecting something like that to happen," she said. "You have? Why?" Matilda asked. "Well," Miss Honey said, "it's only a good guess, but here's what I think. While you were in my class, you had nothing to do, nothing to make you struggle. Your fairly enormous brain was going crazy with frustration. It was bubbling and boiling away like mad inside your head. There were tremendous energy bottled up in there with nowhere to go, and somehow you were able to shoot the energy out through your eyes and make objects move. But now, things are different. You were in the top form competing against children more than twice your age, and all the mental energy is being used up in class. Your brain is for the first time having to struggle and strive to keep really busy, which is great. That's only a theory, mind you. It may be a silly one, but I don't think it's far off from the mark." "I'm glad it's happened," Matilda said. "I wouldn't want to go through life as a miracle worker." "You've done enough," Miss Honey said. "I can still hardly believe you made all of this happen for me." Matilda, who was perched on a tall stool at the kitchen table, and ate her bread and jam slowly. She did love those afternoons with Miss Honey. She felt completely comfortable in her presence, and the two of them talked to each other more than less than equals. "Did you know," Matilda said suddenly, "that the heart of a mouse beats at the rate of 650 times a minute?" "I did not," Miss Honey said, smiling. "How absolutely fascinating. Where did you read that?" "In a book from the library," Matilda said, "and that means it goes so fast you can't even hear the separate beats. It sounds like a buzz." "It must," Miss Honey said. "And how fast do you think a hedgehog heart beats?" Matilda said. "Tell me," Miss Honey said, smiling again. "It's not as fast as a mouse," Matilda said. "It's 300 times a minute. But even so, you wouldn't have thought it went fast, even in a creature that moves so slowly, would you, Miss Honey?" "I certainly wouldn't," Miss Honey said. "Tell me more." "A horse," Matilda said. "That's really slow. It's only 40 times a minute." This child, Miss Honey told herself, seems to be interested in everything. When one is with her, it is impossible to be bored. I love it. The two of them stayed sitting and talking in the kitchen for an hour and longer, and then, about 6 o'clock, Matilda said goodnight and set out to walk home to her parents' house, which was about 8-minute journey away. When she arrived at her own gate, she saw a large black Mercedes motor car parked outside. She didn't take too much notice of that. There were often strange cars parked outside her father's place. But when she entered the house, she was confronted by a scene of utter chaos. Her mother and father were both in the hall, frantically stuffing clothes and various objects into suitcases. "What on earth is going on?" she cried. "What's happening, Daddy?" "We're off," Mr. Wormwood said, not looking off. "We're leaving to the airport in half an hour, so you'd better get packed up. Your brother's upstairs all ready to go. Get a move on, girl. Get going." "Off?" Matilda cried. "Where to?" "Spain," the father said. "It's a better climate than this lousy country." "Spain?" Matilda cried. "I don't want to go to Spain. I love it here. I love my school." "Just do as you're told and stop arguing," the father snapped. "I've got enough troubles without messing with you." "But, Daddy," Matilda began. "Be quiet," the father shouted. "We're leaving in 30 minutes. I'm not missing the plane." "But for how long, Daddy?" Matilda cried. "When are we coming back?" "We aren't," the father said. "Now beat it. I'm busy." Matilda turned away from him and walked out through the front door. As soon as she walked on the road, she began to run. She headed straight back towards Miss Honey's house and reached in less than 4 minutes. She flew up the driveway and suddenly saw Miss Honey in the front garden, standing in the middle bed roses, doing something with the pair of clippers. Miss Honey had heard the sound of Matilda's racing over the gravel, and now she straightened up and turned to step out of the rose bed of the child coming up. My, she said, what in the world is the matter? Matilda stood before her, panting out of breath, with small flushed crimson all over her. They're leaving, she cried. They've all gone mad, and they're filling their suitcases, and they're leaving for Spain in 30 minutes. Who is? Miss Honey asked quietly. Mummy and Daddy and my brother Mike, and they say I've got to go with them. You mean for a holiday? Miss Honey asked. Forever, Matilda cried. Daddy said we're never coming back. There was brief silence, and Miss Honey said, Actually, I'm not very surprised. You mean you knew they were going? Matilda cried. Why didn't you tell me? No, darling, Miss Honey said. I didn't know they were going, but the news still doesn't surprise me. Why? Matilda cried. Please tell me why. She's still out of breath from running out of the shock of all of it. Because your father, Miss Honey said, is in with a bunch of crooks. Everyone in the village knows that. My guess is that he's the receiver of stolen cars from over the country. He's in it deep. Matilda stared at her open mouth. Miss Honey went on. People brought stolen cars to your father's workshops where he changed the number plates and resprayed the bodies with different part color and the rest of it. And now somebody's probably tipped him off to the police, and now they're on him, and he's doing what they all do, running off to Spain where they can't get him. He'll be sending his money out there for years, all ready and waiting for him to arrive. They've been standing on the lawn in front of the lovely brick house with old red tiles on its tall chimneys, and Miss Honey still had a pair of garden clippers in one hand. It was warm golden evening, and the blackbirds were singing somewhere nearby. I don't want to go with them, Matilda shouted suddenly. I don't want to go with them. I'm afraid you must, Miss Honey said. I want to live here with you, Matilda cried. Please let me live here with you. I only wish you could, Miss Honey said, but I'm afraid it's not possible. You can't leave your parents just because you want to. They have the right to take you with them. But what if they agreed, Matilda cried eagerly. What if they said, yes, I can stay with you. Would you let me stay with you then? Miss Honey said softly, yes, that would be heaven. Well, I think they might, Matilda cried. I honestly think they might. They don't actually care tuppence about me. Not so fast, Miss Honey said. We've got to be fast, Matilda cried. They're leaving any moment. Come on, she shouted, grasping Miss Honey's hand. Please come with me and ask them, but we have to hurry. We'll have to run. The next moment, the two of them were running down the drive together. Then they got to the road, and Matilda was ahead, pulling Miss Honey after her and her wrist, and it was wild and wonderful dash, and they made along the country lane through the village where Matilda's parents lived. The big black Mercedes was still outside, and now its boot and its doors were open, and Mr. Wormwood and the brother were scurrying around like ants, piling the suitcases as Matilda and Miss Honey were coming up dashing. Daddy and Mummy, Matilda cried, or burst out, gasping for breath. I don't want to go with you. I want to stay here and live with Miss Honey. And she says I can, but only if you give me permission. Please say yes. Go on, Daddy, say yes, Mummy. The father turned and looked at Miss Honey. You're the teacher woman who once came here to see me, aren't you? He said. Then he went back, stowing his suitcases in the car. His wife said to him, This one will have to go in the back seat. There's no more room in the boot. I would love to have Matilda, Miss Honey said. I would love to look after her with loving care, Mr. Wormwood. I would pay for everything. She wouldn't cost you a penny. It was not my idea, it was Matilda's, and I will not agree to take her without your full and willing consent. Come on, Harry, the mother said, pushing a suitcase in the back seat. Why don't we let her go if that's what she wants? It'll be one less to look after. I'm in a hurry, the father says. I've got a plane to catch. If he wants to stay, let her stay. It's fine with me. Matilda leapt in Miss Honey's arms, and she hugged her, and Miss Honey hugged her back, and the mother and father and the brother were inside the car. The car was pulling away with the tires scratching. The brother gave a wave through the rear window, but the other two didn't even look back. Miss Honey was still hugging the tiny girl in her arms, and neither of them said a word as they stood there watching the big black car tearing round the corner at the end of the road, disappearing forever in the distance. The end. Wow, so Matilda's parents, I mean, that's probably the best thing that they did for her was let her stay with Miss Honey. So proud of it. Um, it was, I mean, and it was a great book. I hope you really liked it. If you would like, here is some information about Roald Dahl himself. Roald Dahl has so many other books. I highly recommend reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Great, great book if you liked Matilda. Stay tuned. Miss Hendricks and myself are going to be hosting a book talk and hopefully a movie watching party of Matilda. And we get to see the differences between Matilda, the book, and Matilda, the movie. So I can't wait to be there with you guys to experience these things. And I hope you liked it. So bye, guys. Hope you enjoyed the book.